the last several times of go around have been exactly that. So certainly are. So I'll call the meeting to order. It's 10 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. You're all very prompt this morning. Appreciate that. Let's see. So Paul, is there anything else right now to kick off? Do we have everyone?
Yeah, we're all set, Senator.
All good to go. Okay, wonderful. Well, again, Secretary Simon, welcome. Again, this is an unprecedented time. Glad to have you here. Very good. So we know that your time is very limited today and that your staff will be available a little bit after as well. So we'll take advantage of that. So the questions right now for you have more to do with things that we think would be important to hear directly from you on. I know that for every one of us, the goal of ensuring that we have safe and secure elections, whether it's COVID or general safety and security. We've gone through several things in the past years, from terrorist situation on 9/11, which was a city election day. So we've had many of those things. And so now we have another one. But on top of that, we also have courts rulings. Usually we have Minnesota election law that are established and in place. But now we have that. We also have some reports that we see in a variety of ways, whether here in Minnesota or otherwise, in regards to ballot harvesting, other things, seeing videos of certainly more than 3 ballots on a dashboard. I mean, there's all kinds of questions about that. What happens, though, is that Minnesotans, they see that too. They see it through social media. They see it on the news. And so it makes them feel uncomfortable. And so we want to be sure that we approach this in a way that we want to know what the rules are, where we are at, and during this time that we get information out to everybody. That's really crucial. So Secretary Simon, my first question for you is, when we had the counties on last week, they were mentioning that they had there was manned drop-off ballot boxes. There were unmanned ones. From what I heard from them, they did not have guidance in regards to how to handle those unmanned. And actually, drop boxes for ballots I don't recall Minnesota. We had where they could bring in absentee ballots to the county office or actually vote. Usually they would vote their ballot there. We've had agent delivery. We had a variety of those things. But this whole concept of a drop box is quite new. So I'd like you to explain. It seems as though if they're inside a county office, then there is some measure. Ramsey County talked about the log that they had, the names they did. Hennepin County didn't do that. So what I'd like to know from you, though, is what is the guidance that you are giving them, whether it's in particular for the unmanned drop-off ballot boxes? If you could just address that issue, Secretary Simon.
First of all, Madam Chair, thank you, and members, thank you for having me today, especially fitting this in on a Friday. I appreciate the opportunity to do it. We're on day minus 18, as you know, so it's a busy everyone. I just want to say before I go on, with me today, just so you know, and they'll be hanging around for a while, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, our Chief of Staff, Julie Strother, our longtime legal counsel since 1981, B.B. Black, and our elections director, David Maeda. Some of them are all familiar to members. I also want to just point out that regardless of our time constraints here today, any member on this committee, regardless of party, is always free to reach out, not only to us as an office, but to me personally. I believe that almost every member of this committee has my cell phone number, and I have almost every member of this committee. There was a member of the Majority Caucus on this committee last week who reached out to me twice in 2 days, which I appreciate, and will always put at the top of the list about a constituent question, and then the member had a question about an election rule. And so I'm always happy to do that. So while these hearings are great, and I understand the reason for them, we don't have to have a hearing for anyone on this committee ever, now or 19 or 29 days from now. Call me or text me or get a hold of anyone that you're seeing here before you. So I just want you to know that. I hope that that's understood. So on the issue
Secretary
of
Simon, Secretary
Yeah.
Simon, I want to say, I appreciate that, but my reason for doing this is so that everybody
Sure.
hears the same information at the
Yep.
same time. But I appreciate your being available individually
Yeah.
as well.
No, it's not either or. I'm not saying that, Madam Chair. It's appropriate for you to have oversight hearings, of course. I'm just saying, I don't want anyone in this committee to think that this is a one-off and that I'm unreachable, or if we don't have time, that you can't tell me what your concerns are or your advice is or anything like that. So to your question, Madam Chair, on drop boxes. So drop boxes actually have been around for a while. There are counties in Minnesota that have had them for decades, since the 80s, we believe, in a few cases, and into the 90s as well. Obviously, they're taking on greater importance this year as more people choose to vote from home or otherwise vote by mail. Minnesota law doesn't say a whole lot about drop boxes. It's not super specific. In other states, particularly states that are only vote by mail, like Washington, Oregon, for all the natural reasons, they're very prescriptive. They talk about the kind of metal and how they need to be bolted, and a lot of details. We don't have that in our statute in Minnesota. So we wanted to offer guidance, two forms of guidance to counties in early September that would really summarize Minnesota law, what there is of Minnesota law, offer our best practices. The reason I say best practices is we had to stitch together very little that was in Minnesota law, but we thought, let's not stop there and just say, well, this is what the law says. We have nothing else to say to you. We wanted to at least recommend to counties and cities what other states have been doing by way of security, whether that be cameras, whether that be observations by people, locations, et cetera. They weren't things that were required by law, but we didn't want to leave counties and cities hanging. One other thing, Madam Chair, just to try to provide some context for your question. As many of you know, Minnesota law was a little bit in limbo this year on one important point bearing on drop boxes. As you know, or maybe I think most of you know, on July 28th, a Ramsey County District Court judge declared that Minnesota's limitation on the number of ballots that could be dropped off for another person was void, and struck down that law. We, by the way, defended that law for the record. We lost, they won. It went to the Minnesota Supreme Court, and the Minnesota Supreme Court, so July 28th was the court ruling. On September 4th, the Minnesota Supreme Court reversed and said, no, that law is okay. So there was a period of weeks in there where there was no such limitation. You could pick up 1,000 ballots or 10,000 ballots for someone. So that's why our guidance finally went out on after the September 4th court ruling, and pretty shortly thereafter, I want to say the 8th, 9th, 10th, something like that, because we were just in flux. We were in limbo as to what the state of the law was. And that bears on the very issue you're talking about, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to set the context. So once we got the final word from the Supreme Court that no, Minnesota's law, which we defended, of a 3-person limit on the number that anyone else can drop off. You can drop off your own, of course, but no more than 3 total for the whole election, not by day, not by county. That's it, the entire election. So if I were going to Hopkins City Hall, I could drop off mine, my wife's, and 2 others, let's say 2 neighbors, but that's it. I'm done. I'm capped for the entire election. So we wanted to advise counties who were eager to provide this service for their citizens all over Minnesota, but were wondering what to do. And particularly Minnesota law is pretty silent. I mean, there just isn't a lot of meat on the bones there in terms of the details. So stitching together best practices from other states and what we could infer from the law, we advised them that they should make clear to residents that unstaffed drop boxes, to the extent they wanted to have those, would only be available for those dropping off their own ballot. That they should have, the best practice would be, not required in Minnesota law, but that the best practice would be that they have signage, clear signage saying, in essence, I'm paraphrasing, don't drop anyone's ballot off in here. And for people who wanted to draft other people's ballots, there would be a requirement that that be staffed. It could be a counter, it could be a staffed drop box, it could be a drive-through, but another human being would have to be involved. What we did say for those drop boxes that had signage is that the best practice, they should at least be monitored. If you can't staff them, and as you know, Madam Chair, and I never tire of repeating this, I know you know this and have for years, out of our 87 counties in Minnesota, only 9 counties, pretty much the biggest ones, have full-time year-round elections people. The norm in Minnesota is not Hennepin and Ramsey and Dakota County. The norm, the overwhelming norm and majority in Minnesota is the people who do elections wear many other hats, many. busy right now, not just with elections. They're doing property taxes, they're doing inspections, they're doing ditch and drainage work. And sometimes it's important, as I know you know, Madam Chair, but that's important. So they were wondering for us, well, we just don't have the people power. We don't have the staff power to do all this. So our guidance to them was they should at least be monitored. And I've witnessed personally in county courthouses and elsewhere what that means. It doesn't mean that there's a human being standing there. That would be the ultimate. That would be what we would do for. But it does mean that it's within eyes view, either a security guard in an atrium of a courthouse, or law enforcement, or someone from an elections office or another office is in essence keeping an eye on it. So that's what we thought was practical under the circumstances with just a few weeks to go. That, generally speaking, is our guidance. I will note that the two people who actually drafted it, I know you want to hear from me, but for more details, the two people who really, and there were two separate memos, one more of a legal memo, that was from Ms. Black, and the more policy memo, or the sort of summarizing the legal memo, Ms. Strother worked on quite a bit. So they are well versed in the details and minutia, but so I'm giving you kind of a 30,000-foot view. But that, I think, is responsive to your question. That was our guidance to the counties and cities. And as I say, it didn't go out till about the second week of September, only because we were in flux. This thing was on appeal. Would there be a limit at all or not? We finally knew on Friday, September 4th.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So the question I have is, so there's signage. It makes me kind of think, though, of all the speed limit signs we have around the state. We have law enforcement. We have cameras as well. We have a whole variety of things outside buildings and such. So what about the concept of establishing a video oversight? Was that included? I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing.
Yes, it was. In the guidance, we suggested that as a best practice. Again, in other states, that kind of stuff is statute. And I have to say, just by way of preview, I would suggest that this is an issue that the legislature should revisit in 2021, putting a little bit more meat on the bones. Other states, particularly ones that have been doing this for many, many years, that are vote by mail only. I'm not saying we should be that state. I'm saying those states have very detailed rules down to, materials and anchoring and all the rest. And our law is just silent about that. So I think filling in those gaps would be something that folks should take a look at. But to your point, Madam Chair, yes, we did advise as a best practice. It's not required in law because the law is pretty silent on this, that video monitoring would be a thing to do if you can do it.
Thank you very much. I personally find this very uncomfortable, that if the law is silent, then the presumption is that you can. And then you make up policies or suggestions or ideas extrapolated from the rest of the law, especially in a presidential election year. I think to go to this point of saying, okay, now this is all okay, and then after the fact, and especially when we know that there are, by all reports, hundreds of attorneys in regard to these cases. And I think this puts Minnesota and other states may have sufficient law that they can rely upon. But I feel very uncomfortable with this, and especially when we have a 3-ballot delivery, so on and so forth, and with them being unmanned, to say there's signage and a best practice is to video it. Once those ballots are inside that drop box and some of those things, I think makes me feel very uncomfortable knowing the level of court cases that is waiting to descend upon every single state. And so I just want to express my concern in regards to that. So especially in regards to you have no video, you have another thing. And I think it just says, how are you going to uphold Minnesota election law, which is your job as the chief election official, in regards to these limits? And yet there is a sign, maybe a camera. Of course, there are always, as we know today and see all the time, there are news reports that there's pretty much a cell phone camera around somewhere watching somebody at just about any time. So if we've all become aware of that, and that's really important. So I just want to express my discomfort with going beyond what the election law actually clearly allows to do that. And the next area that I would like to ask you more about, though, is the seniors in assisted living, maybe large apartment building complexes. And again, we're seeing some news reports as well. And I think especially for seniors, I mean, they have the normal challenges. Now they have COVID on top of it all. Matter of fact, I got a phone call last night from a daughter of a mom who was, I think this was assisted living, and she's been in her apartment since the middle of March, about 200 days, 10 days now going without leaving her apartment. Wants to vote, wants to be able to vote. And the daughter is saying, you know, we have always, as a family, taken care of their mom in that way. And her question is, and I think my question is for you. So Secretary Simon, considering, and again, we've seen these reports, people call, they ask, they want to know, in this unprecedented time, what are you going to do to protect those seniors, to make sure that their vote is their vote, that now they're placed in this situation where the same people that they're dependent upon for caring for them, the question is, how are you going to protect them from, like we do in the polling place? That's the reason why we have a polling place. You have Democrats, Republicans, election judges, watchful, they protect the ballot box. I mean, there are things that come with a polling place that is really, really important to people, to protect them from coercion, manipulation, from intimidation, from suggestions or directives, to protect them so that their vote is their vote. So in this unprecedented time, Secretary Simon, how are you going to protect those seniors in those kinds of situations?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the question, but let me go back just a little bit and make a clarification. And if I was not clear, I need to be more clear. Drop boxes are legal in Minnesota, period. They're legal. So the law says they're legal. The question is, there isn't a lot of detail about the law. So we were forced, when counties asked for detail, to use best practices. So I just want to make that point clear. So I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree on that. So they're legal. It's nothing that we read into law. And they've been used for decades, including when you were secretary, in many counties, including those with male-only precincts. And so they've been in use for quite a while, for decades. So
they are, Secretary Simon, but this is not a normal election. This is a use of them quite beyond what was there. And so let's realize, though, that we are still in unprecedented time in what is going on. That is still a fact.
So I think you're right to say that we're in unprecedented times, but when it comes to living in assisted living or nursing homes, it's actually a lot like it's always been in this respect. Well, it's always a crime to coerce, to have someone vote for another and insert their judgment about candidates for another, whether it's young, old, living in a group home or living in their own home. So that hasn't changed. What has changed, thanks to this committee, which I appreciate, and the House as well, is on a bipartisan basis, the 2020 only elections bill that you passed, which had a lot of good things in it. One of the things that it had in it was to make sure that those administering that process could do so safely. I'm talking about from the standpoint of health. So as all of you know, typically what happens is employees from counties and cities are there to help administer the absentee process for those residents in the kind of facilities you described, Madam Chair, who want that to happen. But this year, you all, I think, had the foresight to realize and heard from some of these facilities that they didn't particularly want people who don't live and work there coming in there because of the pandemic. And so you authorized one time only, a 2020 special, very on brand for this unique year. You authorized just this year for employees of those facilities for the first time in memory to be basically deputized or authorized to perform the function. And the advantage that has, apart from just public health, it seems to us, and as we've gotten reports and feedback from around the state, and naturally we're in contact with some of these institutions, is that that's actually a good thing, though it's time consuming, and you already have staff that are at their limit in many senses, and it's a very tense time for them. in a way, deputizing or authorizing them and not having outsiders from the counties and cities administer this process means they keep a more watchful eye, more than usual, more than in other years, more than in the past, because they and not outsiders coming in are administering this process. They are able to keep a watchful eye on the folks who live in those facilities. Timing is tough, it's true. Everyone's bandwidth is stretched to its absolute limit in life generally, and particularly in those facilities. But one perhaps unintended positive consequence is there is more of a sense of ownership in administering that. But to your overall question, which I'm discerning, is, who's to prevent someone from leaning hard or coercing someone in one of these facilities, just generally speaking? And to that, my answer is, anything's possible, I suppose, only given the limits of your imagination about how foul a deed someone could commit in any area of the law. But I'm satisfied in Minnesota that the instances of that historically have been absolutely minimal. And that has served us very well. So that's all I can say. In this unprecedented year, you had the foresight, all of you as legislators, to make some moves which had the effect of, I think, giving a lot more people more peace of mind.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate that, but you have to realize, though, that when you have isolation, how do you know? How do you find that out? Remembering that we have instances of shoplifting all the time. Majority of it is never caught. We all know it happens. They have cameras, they have signs, but our stories over and over again, the losses that they have. And so I'm not necessarily reassured, because for me, it's a matter of making sure that they are protected in those situations, especially since the legislature also with that provided a very large sum of money to your office to enable you to do that work as well. And the next thing I want to ask you about, though, is in particular, though, has to go with postmarks. So there was a consent decree, if I recall, that you agreed to in regards to postmarking absentee ballots. Minnesota election law, a long time also, but in this case, you agreed to not follow Minnesota current law, which means all ballots must be in on election day, no matter how they are cast, through the mail, in a county office, in the polling places, whatever methodology, all voters treated equally. Their ballot has to be in by election day. And those voters who are at the polling place as of 8 o'clock, they get to vote, even if the line is such that they need to stay open a little bit longer. That's longstanding Minnesota election law. We're in a whole new area right now of this postmark situation. So, Secretary Simon, please let us know what is the policy interpretation of the Secretary of State office in regards to the postmark. Now, it's rather straightforward. I think most people can say, okay, it's postmarked, but there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions coming to me about postmarked, when received, what if it's not postmarked? Can you just clarify that?
Madam Chair, thank you. And first of all, as to the consent decree, we have an obligation to follow the law. The law consists of several things. It consists of the written statute, but it also consists of federal statute. It consists of the state constitution and the United States Constitution. So the consent decree that you referred to was one that was entered by a court. It's not something I can do or any other litigant can do. The court has to do it after deciding for itself that it is fair, reasonable, and in the public interest. That's the standard. So it can't go into effect just because I think it should or some other litigation party should. It has to be blessed by a court. And in this case, a court had the opportunity to hear from those who objected to it, so-called interveners. There was one political campaign and one political party that intervened and objected. The court heard their arguments, and the court then ruled on it, deciding that for this year and this year only, for a lot of constitutional reasons, which transcend Minnesota statutory law, that it had to be this way this year. I will note that that was not appealed. So all political parties now agree that this is the way it should be. I want to repeat that.
And you did as well, Secretary Simon, correct?
All Minnesota and national political parties agree. They did not appeal this ruling. They could have. They were given an invitation by the Minnesota Supreme Court to skip the Court of Appeals and go right to the Supreme Court. They opted to do that, which tells me one of two things is true. Either all political parties agree that it's the right thing to do under the circumstances, and or they agree that it's what the law compels under the circumstances. So I want to get that very clear. This was not appealed. Everyone agrees this is the right thing to do. Now, to your question, Madam Chair, as to the details about the postmark, that is a suit that's currently in litigation. We just heard the other day that it's been appealed to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. So for that reason, I can't say a lot about that. I don't want my words ending up as part of the record in that case. I will rest on the pleadings in that lawsuit and what ends up in the 8th Circuit. So I can't go further than that because that's exactly what's in dispute in this lawsuit.
So Secretary Simon, let's be certain though, that when there's a consent decree, all parties, and you were a party, you were a named party in that, and you had to agree to that. The Attorney General, Keith Ellison, did as well, and then the plaintiffs. So you were the three principals. There may be interveners, there may be others who have an opinion or so on and so forth, but you were a part of that. And so as a part of that, you agreed to the status that we are in right now. And I respect the fact that it is on appeal. So it is being appealed. And it is not, at this point, we are left with the situation that it is on appeal. We'll be waiting to hear back from that. But to the points that were in the consent decree or in the material that you submitted as part of it, that is a matter of public record, and you can repeat those things, and you can do so today. If I recall, that's the rules you can do.
Yeah. Madam Chair, the consent decree, the language of the consent decree speaks for itself. I don't have it in front of me. You're free to read it into the record. I will not.
You will not read into the record.
I don't have it in front of me. If you have it, you can.
I understand it. I understand it. You cannot because you don't have it in front of you. I'm sure we can follow up with your staff and accomplish that just fine. I think that is really important, though, for us to have that, and certainly what is on appeal, but those things that are a matter of record can be repeated and are not an issue. They're a matter of fact in a court case. I appreciate some of that. Because of that, it puts us in a situation, but I think that what is your plan then for when this appeal may come out? How will your office communicate to our 87 counties? And then they have to communicate with all of the election judges and a variety of those people. What is your process? What is your plan for communicating the results? Because it looks like it's going to be very, very close.
Madam Chair, are you referring to the results after election? Just
Yes.
relating.
I'm referring to the appeal. I'm expecting that the appeal would come out before Election Day. And since it's going to be very short, there's going to have to be a very rapid communication. Either way, they're going to have to communicate. So what is the plan for that?
Right. Well, and just a point about the appeal, though, that's important. The consent decree itself was not appealed by the parties that had intervened, which is a political party and a national presidential campaign. They have concluded that it's the right thing to do, or it's the legally compelled thing to do. The current case is a so-called collateral attack on that, meaning it's not the parties to that original suit, it's two other parties in a separate venue and in a separate court. I just want to make clear. So it's being appealed by different people. What's being appealed is the sort of collateral attack on the consent decree. And so, and the plaintiffs were unsuccessful before the 8th Circuit. I do agree with you that it's likely that there will be some outcome, although that's not guaranteed before Election Day. If there's a reversal, because of I'm sorry, it's necessary to answer your question, Madam Chair, but the grounds on which the federal court denied the relief that the plaintiffs sought was that they didn't have standing to sue. They didn't have standing. They're not litigants that have the power to sue. And so a reversal wouldn't mean they won the case. A reversal would mean you do a do-over in the district court. I'm not sure if that do-over would be done by the time of the end of the election, but let's just say it is. The gist of your question is, what if there's a change in the law? What if, by whatever means, the law changes and now we don't have a postmark rule any longer? And that's certainly a possibility. In that case, we have been talking a lot with counties, as we do all the time. We put out weekly bulletins. I'm on the phone constantly with county auditors and city clerks talking about those things. And they understand that there's some risk there. So they're on notice about that possibility. We would then go into overdrive in our own office with our own communications mechanisms, obviously earned media, paid media. We've advised, we've retained, as you may have seen, with the money that you made available, an ad agency to do service announcements. They are on notice that we will have to pivot immediately with that ad budget and content and messaging. If that, I believe it's unlikely to happen, but it's certainly possible that it would happen. So we're ready if that happens, and we'll communicate that message as quickly and efficiently as we can to as many Minnesotans as we can. That's the best I can say.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I understand that is a uniquely challenging situation, no question about it, but not just for the Secretary of State office, but mostly for the people in Minnesota that sometimes are uncertain as to what it is. And I'm sure all of us who communicate over and over again don't wait. By the way, I would also say another concern that I hear, people being afraid that there'll be a lockdown, some sort of lockdown, and that the polls will all be closed on Election Day, and that those who have voted every single year, well, every single election day, for them to go to the polls on Election Day is a really important thing. They bring their children with them. They talk about it. They go through the process, and it's a really, really neat thing. And a polling place, unlike any other methodology, has certain protections in place that are so built into the polling place. But that is their concern, that someone, a government official, they're concerned that the Secretary of State could recommend, the governor could act, that the Attorney General, somebody like that, will shut down the polling places on Election Day. I think it's really, really important to the people in Minnesota, who I hear so many from. Is it safe for us to wait and go to the polling place on Election Day, or will they change them or close them down or do something to disrupt that? And I think it's fair to give you an opportunity to express in regards to that subject.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I can't imagine any circumstance where there would be a lockdown and a prohibition on polling place. I just can't imagine one. It's nothing I've talked about, nothing I would recommend. I just can't even imagine it. So no, my mantra, what I've been saying is we're going to have 3,000 polling places, whether 2 people or 2 million show up. We're going to do it. They're already staffed and ready to go. The election judges have been trained. The PPE and the supplies that we have ordered and are already in the process or already have been shipped and distributed to all 3,000 polling places. You saw that, I hope, in the primary campaign. We had hand sanitizer and pumps and almost surgical grade masks for all the election workers and disposable masks for voters as well. So everything's ready to go. So there's no plan I know of. I can't imagine a circumstance in any state in this country where there's a lockdown that would prohibit polling places. So I want to put people at ease about that. And I want to remind people, any legal way of voting is equally legitimate. Any legal way is equally worthy and equally legitimate. Polling place, in-person absentee, or from home absentee. They are all equally legitimate.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And certainly during this time, a ballot that an individual has cast and taken the time to mark, they're all treasured and valued and deserve that protection. It's just that some areas make it a little bit easier, and some areas it's a little bit more of a challenge to meet that same level of that, but that's the goal that we do have. I wish that we would be able to cover a little bit more in regards to the whole postmark situation, because that really affects our voters and what they're able to do. And then also, I think that we will leave some of those. We do have some questions for Mr. Maeda, and I know that you gave your time here and appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to, as I leave, I want to end with, I hope that every member of this committee, regardless of party, knows, and if you don't have my cell number, I will arrange to get it to you. I think I have almost everyone's. You are always free to call me, to text me, to reach out to anyone that will be before you here today with your concern, a constituent's concern. This is not a one-off, though I appreciate the need, Madam Chair, for something that's public facing, of course, but it's not an either or. So you can always let me know when you've got a concern or pushback or feedback of any kind. So thank you very much for your time and attention, Madam Chair.
Sure, we do have one question that I will go to. I'm not sure if it's for you, Secretary of State, or not. Senator Howe, if you just have a moment, we'll just see here.
Sure.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming, Secretary of State Simon. The question I have is, you know, if you had concerns about the ballot box situation or some of these other things that you took best practices out of, with 5 special sessions, I would have thought there's plenty of opportunity to bring those things to the legislature at the during a special session we've had 5 of them. I would have thought that you could have brought that to us in a bill form or suggest it to us to bring that forward to us so the people and the representatives of the people could have a say in how this is constructed and how we went forward. Why didn't you do that for us?
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Howe. Well, you know, maybe it's just a miscommunication. We're always happy and pleased to meet with you or any others who have a suggestion about legislation. You know, if the presumption should be that you do want to work on something, that's great. There hasn't been a lot of output over the last few years. Very few bills that have been passed and moved to the floor. So, you know, you can understand our assumption that there wasn't a real appetite to do much of any legislating on elections matter, as that there hasn't been for quite some time. But you realize also that between July 28th and September 4th, we really were in limbo as to the law. So it wasn't clear what we could even legislate anyway. So that's the best answer I can give. I'm happy to hear that you're interested in talking about election law and actually passing things off of the floor like simple administrative bills with non-controversial provisions. And I hope going forward that in that spirit, we do those things that aren't controversial and that we can all put our heads around and sit on things for a long, long time. Thank you. With that, Madam Chair, thank you for your time.
Well, Secretary Simon, I want you to know, though, that it has been the past practice that the Secretary of State office brings forth legislation. That is your expertise. You're with the knowledge, you work with all of the election officials, and if you have a question about things, it is also the duty to come to the legislature and not wait for us to guess what issues might be there within the Secretary of State office. That has been the strength of Minnesota, that we have done things in a bipartisan fashion, not with a unilateral best guess. So I appreciate your being here today and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. And I just want to reiterate my openness to you for anything on this issue or any other issue. Let's have a situation where we don't have an administrative bill that sits unacted on for 3 years. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Okay, members. Mr. Maeda, you are no stranger to our committee. A matter of fact, to just comment that Mr. Maeda, before going to the Secretary of State office, the electronic polling place roster mechanism, Mr. Maeda was greatly involved in the testing of them. And there was a multiple year process that we went through. I think it was Senator Bonhoeff at the time, worked together a lot of things. As a matter of fact, as I've seen, we did a very methodical process of looking at things, working with people, testing, piloting, all kinds of equipment, working it through, just a lot of prep work and then the law. And it's really held firm all this time, which is kind of unusual that you actually have a body of law in regards to that is held firm. So I just want to express publicly my appreciation for your work and what you have done. Considering what we have heard here from the Secretary, now you are in that Secretary of State office, I just want to give you kind of a general opportunity for just a couple minutes here before we go to other questions about anything you might want to fill in after the Secretary of State has left now.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Madam Chair, thank you, both you and Senator Lane, who was Representative Lane back then, on the actual passage of the original electronic poll book legislation. I will report that over half the counties in the state now use that technology. And when Secretary Simon and I visit with the auditors it's really a pleasure to hear how much they think it's improved the process. I mean, I think statewide, everyone using them agrees that it's really helped out in the process on election day. The only thing I can really add to what Secretary Simon said is this has obviously been a very unusual year to administer an election. When I started last year, our focus really was on cybersecurity at that point, to the point where we actually brought in a cyber navigator, a new position, to focus on cybersecurity issues. So a lot of the focus last year and coming into the beginning of this year was focused on cybersecurity concerns. And then the pandemic hit, and then we had to figure out, of course, how to run an election safely so people, to your point on polling places, people could feel safe going to their polling place or had an alternative to absentee vote as we allow in our state. And then recently we've heard more news about potential physical confrontations at polling places. So a lot of our work with our federal and state law enforcement partners has been focused on that in the last few weeks. So it's been all over the gamut in 2020. It's been the most unique year as in election administration that I've ever been a part of. I've been in election administration off and on for about 25 years, both with Minnetonka and out of state, and previously with Hennepin County and Washington County. So I've spent most of my career in election administration, and I have never been a part of anything like this. And we've had unique things occur in Minnesota, of course, but I think those are my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions people have.
Okay, very, very good. Thank you very much. I think that some of the questions that we've had were a little bit more, and I just want to open this up if any member has a question. I've noticed some people know how to use that little hand button somewhere. I've never yet found it myself, that neat little blue hand button, Senator Howe, that you flipped up there that let me know you wanted to ask a question. And I'm always thinking of it, but when I'm actually on the Zoom call and then afterwards I forget about it. But at any rate, if you want to just simply raise your hand as well, just some way to let me know, or using the chat box as well. So I appreciate that.
Madam Chair, in order to
Senator Howe,
get that
yes.
in order to get that raise your hand, you got to click on the participants, and then it's on the bottom of that screen, just to let you know.
Okay, great, fantastic, thank you. I see someone has that, Senator Curran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was hoping that Secretary Simon would have been here, but it would be still a good question for the office. Last week, we had the counties on, and I think Mr. Mayda was there as well, and would really love the opinion of the Secretary of State's office of it. We heard from Hennepin County that they made no attempt in relation to ballot boards to reflect or appreciate the state statute that requires the utilization of judges, both Republican, Democrat, or all major parties. And instead, they go out to choose 102 seasonal employees to staff those positions. And that appears to be a great concern, right? And then we heard Ramsey County sounds like they're doing a great job and that they can actually do that. So why is it that one county is has no desire, shows no desire, and deems it impossible, and the other county seems to be able to reflect and appreciate state statute and implement it as it is and provide the transparency that we desire to make sure that not only is our election system secure, but it's perceived as secure as well. So what's the guidance from the Secretary of Simon's or the Secretary of State's office in relation to Hennepin County not following state statute and hiring staff? And I would love your opinion as well, Mr. Mayor, you've been in this business a long time, about how does one teach somebody to be nonpartisan? I know there's a lot in that question, but it's really a big concern that we need to understand. What's the position of the Secretary of State when you knowingly participate with one of your biggest partners in monitoring the election, that they're not adhering to that piece of it, which really gives us eyes and ears and insight and fairness into the system. So I appreciate your response.
Mr. Maeda.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Curran. I'm looking to our attorney because we are involved in litigation on this issue, on the issue of using nonpartisan staff on ballot boards. I will say, I was there and I heard Ms. Gelms comments and to the point of comparing Ramsey and Hennepin, there are very different processes in place just for the mere size of Hennepin County and the volume of absentees that they get. As far as your question on training someone to be nonpartisan, we really do. The election judge training that we do, obviously, and I agree with Senator Kiffmeyer, it's very important that we have balance in the polling places and throughout our processes. But I think it was Senator Kiffmeyer who commented last week, once you have a team of election judges, they really are working together as a team to make sure all election laws are followed. And in Minnetonka, when I had a ballot board in Minnetonka, we, just for the logistics of it, so you know, the first few weeks, throw this year out, but usually during an election cycle, absentee ballots trickle in the first few weeks. So I actually used staff as my ballot board for the first few weeks in Minnetonka, and they were our finance staff, and they were very good with numbers, and they were very nonpartisan, as we all were at the city level. And then as the process got more busy, we would bring in election judges, because just logistically, bring in a team of election judges to process 2 absentee ballots didn't seem like a good use of time. And that's why we use our staff. But then when things ramped up, we did use election judges from different political parties, and that was in Minnetonka.
Sounds like somebody has a little cat in the background.
I'm going to shut my door.
Oh, it's okay. Mr. Maeda, it's fine. We kind of enjoy some of these Zoom interludes of hearing little children come on and all of that, and we actually kind of enjoy that. I think one of the issues for me is when you have, the question here isn't so much about is somebody acting, claiming, who knows, whatever, like nonpartisan. I really appreciate it. Professional administrators do that, but it's to the outsiders when they look in. When the outsiders look in, when you can say to them, we've taken this list of election judges from the 2 major political parties right now, Democrats or Republicans, they say, okay, I have a Democrat and I have a Republican, and they're doing this. So to the outsider, this is a really important consideration. Matter of fact, one of the things in the recounts that I found over and over and over again, one of the first questions is, what were the political parties of the election judges that were making key decisions? It is inevitably the first question. And so knowing we have so many of these court cases, I think everybody needs to be really careful about keeping in mind that. And one of the protections to you and our election administrators is adhering to that, because that's what you can use as a backup to that. But I want to get back to Senator Coran. Do you want to follow up on that question of other things?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just think that we keep missing the opportunity to provide that guidance that we know it's safe and secure. If another county can do this and they have the commensurate resources, and I know in the past that there's been a challenge of obtaining a number of judges and that the availability. We have plenty of judges available this year in this particular election cycle. And I would expect that the Secretary of State's office would provide really clear guidance on how to accomplish that. We've provided, in fact, I think Senator Kiffmeyer mentioned, I think $24 million have been provided in elections, and that's made available to a variety of counties. And so if we're going to go down the path of hiring in lieu of the state statutes, what efforts should be made to make sure that those people who are hired have that political balance that we're looking for? I mean, those are the things that we're looking at, and I'm sure we've got the list of names and numbers. Somebody could simply go through three of the first pages on their social media and determine their political affiliation. The equal amount of work should be done if it's going to be full-time hired or part-time temporary people. We have to go and make sure that the perception and reality match each other. And that's what Senator Kiffmeyer just mentioned. We have to make sure that we are making sure that the system is secure, whether it be ballot boxes that are sitting on corners or every aspect of the largest county in the state, where most of those issues seem to keep being highlighted from a conformity or safety and security around our ballot process. So we would expect that the Secretary of State's office would be much more clear when they're not following state statute, when they're one of your closest, largest partners in this election process. So with that, Madam Chair, I appreciate the time.
Okay, thank you, Senator Cran. So, Mr. Maeda, I just want to say, though, that we have all these 87 counties, but usually the larger the county, the more staff they have. And so Hennepin County has a much larger staff. They also have staff from the city of Minneapolis, so they really have a lot of leeway there and what they have. And also they have a lot of people to draw from. Certainly, Democrats and Republicans in Hennepin County, the size of it, I am sure there are ample numbers, and Ramsey County and its county size, as Mr. Triplett testified to, how they use the election judge list from the Secretary of State office. When they were done with that, then they went to previous election judges that had their political designation, and they were able to have a group then of 93 and use them to pay. That seems like a very reasonable thing. And I see sometimes saying, well, with these drop boxes, we kind of came up with suggestions and best practice and did that. But Minnesota election law is very clear. You must use election judges for accepting and rejecting the absentee ballots. You may add to that, but it doesn't say substitute for them. So it seems rather clear. So to Senator Cran's question, Mr. Maeda, what is the direction from the Secretary of State office to comply with what the law says regarding must use election judges from political party lists? Mr. Maeda.
As far as our communication about things specific to processes like the ballot board, we cover that. As you know, Madam Chair, we have every even year we have a statewide training of auditors, and we have different modules, and absentee voting is certainly part of that. So the training itself is, we communicate what the statute is, that election judges are part of the ballot board that can be supplemented by employees. And I will point out in Hennepin County, based on my experience in Minnetonka, the county has its own ballot board, but almost all the cities in the county have their own separate ballot boards. And as far as my knowledge, every city that I know of uses election judges as part of the process. And so if we're talking about Hennepin County, I'd be more comfortable, of course, if Ms. Gelms was here to answer for them, but we do give guidance during their statewide training on all the election laws in the state.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Maeda. Another hand I see raised is General Counsel from the Secretary of State's office. I'm not sure if that was a wish to speak to a particular issue or in general. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm B.B. Black. I'm the General Counsel at Secretary of State. And I just wanted to inform the committee and the members that even though Secretary of State was not a party to this litigation I'm going to tell you about, there were cases brought on this point. So it's to Senator Curran's question on this point against Duluth, Minneapolis, Ramsey County, and Olmsted County, as I recall. And those cases were consolidated in Ramsey County. And Judge Gilligan did issue a rather lengthy opinion in denying a writ of mandamus, which would have required only election judges to be used for absentee ballot boards. And his interpretation of the law was not what the plaintiffs had in mind, and it did provide a lot more flexibility in terms of the use of county staff or city staff in these absentee ballot boards. I'm not going to recap the whole opinion because we'll be here beyond the time that Mr. Maeda and I can be available, but it's a very lengthy decision. And so that is, I would say that is the guidance on ballot boards, the decision of the judge. I am not aware, but of course we're not a party. I'm not aware that has been appealed. So for now, that is the guidance from the courts, and I think that is, in the absence of anything else, in terms of legislation, further legislation, that interpretation of this statute is, for the moment, what everybody should be following.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those comments. It just brings up one of the concerns I have, and I know that in election years and non-election years, election laws have been developed through a very strong bipartisan effort between the House and Senate. Very strong sense of doing that. What's challenging right now is the number of court cases. We seem to be governing now on the basis of court cases and special powers and other things that make it very difficult for folks who are not attorneys to be able to follow and comprehend and deal with it. So, but thank you, appreciate that information. And again, between court cases, going to court, court rulings, appeals, denials, and the many of them, it is a real challenge for a regular follow through of what we are trying to accomplish here. With that, I would also see if there are other folks who would have a desire to have a question at this time. However you raise your hand, it's open to me. All right, well, we have a hard stop in just a few minutes, and it's always nice to complete things and get things done promptly in time. I see a hand just came up, Senator Lane. Have to unmute yourself.
Okay,
There you go.
I just wanted to just make a brief comment that I was just thinking about ballot boxes that when you drop your ballot into the mail via a post office box out there on the curb, that is actually dropping it into a ballot box too. So the ballot box idea needs to be seen in the broader context of we drop things into boxes to mail them.
Thank you very much, Senator Lane. Okay, with that, members, I believe we've concluded our business today. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your availability from the Secretary of State's office. Appreciate that very much. But with that, concluding our business today, we stand adjourned. Thank you.